I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to
the flag
of
of the
the United States
of
of America
and
to the republic
for which it stands, one
one nation
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty and justice for
for
all.
all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are going to do a few business actions. I'd like a motion to approve personnel actions. I need Mrs. Nardilillo.
I move to approve personnel actions as recommended by the superintendent of schools.
Thank you. In a second, Mrs. Grinnell, any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Thank you. I'd like a motion to approve a swim program. Mr. Johnson?
Yes. I move to approve the Shaker Learn to Swim program as recommended by the superintendent of schools.
Thank you. And a second, Mr. Shavo, any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Thank you. I'd like a motion to approve the revised budget calendar. Mrs. Nardilillo?
I move to approve the revised 22-23 budget calendar as recommended by the assistant superintendent for business.
Thank you. In a second, Mr. Shavo, any questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Thank you. I'd like a motion to approve a resolution to appoint an impartial hearing officer. Ms. Grinnell?
I move to approve the resolution to appoint Sebastian Weiss as impartial hearing officer to preside over a due process complaint as recommended by the clerk of the board.
Thank you. And a second, Mr. Shavo, any questions or comments? Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor? All right, thank you very much. I'd like a motion to enter into an open session of the curriculum committee. Mr. Johnson?
I move to enter into an open session of the curriculum committee.
Thank you. And a second, Mr. Komprosky, all in favor? Thank you very much. We're in curriculum right now. Just like to mention that Mr. Johnson and Mr. Komprosky are co-chairs of our curriculum committee. Mr. Kaur, do you want to begin, or should we begin with Ms. Skills, or what's up?
I think we should, we're very fortunate to have representation in our English and Social Studies department this evening, and we're going to be taking a look at the excellent work that we're doing to improve civic literacy and teaching and learning in those valuable areas. I think we know that education in a democracy is vital. And so I think that is an important thing for us to understand, for us to gain insight into the work that we're doing in North County.
The board has been looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you. And so without any further ado, I think I would like to turn it right over to our presenters this evening.
So we'd like to thank the board for having us tonight. We have a great amount of information to share in social studies, in ELA, and also in our libraries, K-12. So the work you'll hear about tonight is part of our student experience in North Colony from kindergarten to 12th grade. And so we're going to jump right into it. I would like to thank Pam Burns, Bob Polero, Jessica Lansing, Deb Armbruster, and Kelly Weatherby as the team that put together the work, and some guests that we have along for the ride as well. And we're going to get right to it as I share my screen. And again, thank you for having us. All right, can everyone see? All right, Ms. Burns.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit in the beginning about some of the work that's taken place in the English department related specifically to implementing the culturally responsive sustaining educational framework. And then later on in the presentation, you'll hear more about media literacy and social studies. So if you'd like to go to, so you can see, I know that you're all probably familiar with the framework and that it is, you know, something that obviously we're very committed to, K-12, and it's a new document. We, in the English department, we started doing a little bit of work around it in October. And then at the November workshop day, we were able to dive a little bit deeper and kind of begin, you know, drilling down to some collaboration work with teacher teams. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So I know that back in December, on December 6th, that some of our literacy, K2 literacy coaches and Brian Deneen spoke to you in great detail about some of the shifts that we've made in our K5 programs, specifically the Sadler Phonics and the Hagerty Phonemic Awareness program. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We have a pretty packed agenda tonight, so I didn't want to repeat information that you've already received. I just wanted to mention that a lot, you know, all of these shifts are driven by, you know, our commitment to promoting research practices, specifically, you know, addressing literacy gaps for some of our historically marginalized cohorts and making sure that that all of the assessment tools that we're using and the foundational skill programs and the reading texts that we're putting in front of our children are reflective of our commitment to diversity and inclusion at North Colony. So I'm just going to go right on to the secondary level and talk a little bit about some of the teacher practices. So in the English department, a lot of our work on the November workshop day involved analyzing and talking specifically around two of the branches on the little tree that you saw at the beginning, specifically inclusive curriculum and assessment and high expectations and rigorous instruction. And if you see underneath these two categories, there's some, you know, the document goes obviously into greater detail, but it has these specific components under each. And so some of the things that you're going to see, some of the work that teachers are involved in this year has to do with some of these specific bullet points. And so if you could go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to show you a really quick little video that showcases some of the work that's actually taking place in classrooms. So just before, I'll give you a quick, there's three classes represented in this video. There's a 10th grade consultant teacher classroom, which is co-taught by a special education teacher and an English teacher. And this is made up of students with disabilities and general ed students. And they're you're going to see some students interviewed during a research project that had to do with advocacy. And, you know, there was a lot of student agency and choice in this research project. So I just wanted to give it as one example of some of the civic work and some of the work that we've done to try to transform classrooms from more student-centered places where students have more choice and agency and involvement in their own research and education. The other two classes that you'll see, one is an AP literature class in which the students are studying two contemporary poets, specifically two living poets, Amanda Gordon and Clint Smith. And you'll see how some of the curriculum in that course has shifted. It's interesting because you'll see Siobhan Matros teaching the class and it comes in the middle of a Hamlet unit, which is very interesting and quite a shift from the way things might have happened in the past in AP Lit. So I thought you'd appreciate seeing some of those conversations that students are involved in. And then the third classroom is a 7th grade integrated ENL, ELA co-taught class. So there's English language learners, there's 2 teachers in the room, and the students are involved in discussing one of the new texts that we've added at the 7th grade level called Brown Girl Dreaming. So Brian, if you could just put this on, it's just a few minutes and you can see some of the kids in action.
Okay, who did you pick to study about?
I picked Michelle Obama. What surprised me a lot was that I knew Miss Michelle was like a boss and like how she like did a lot of things. But what really surprised me like how she was really involved with the community and got in touch with kids. Because I've heard with that, but like she's having all these funds, all these programs for like for example, she did Let's Move to inspire kids to get active and get outside. But that really surprised me because like I didn't know she was like that close with children and communities and everything and volunteering in soup kitchens. But yeah, she really very good person. I like her. She's very influential, inspiring.
What did you pick to learn about?
Hello, I'm Sam, and I decided to pick Malala.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, and tell me why you picked Malala.
I remember I learned about her in elementary school, and I learned about her activism, and it really stuck out with me. And she's just somebody who like I really wanted to do because of her activism.
And what surprised you? Is there anything that you learned about Malala?
Honestly, like how many times she decided, like how many times the Taliban tried to assassinate her. That was like very surprising and kind of saddening.
And also to introduce us to Amanda Gorman on the page. So we've seen her on the screen. And you also read in the conversation, what she had said, most people met you by seeing you. And she talks about the irony of the fact that she, with her speech impediment, for so long felt at home and comfortable with the written word on the page. So the irony of the fact that she has become the voice in the face of young people's poetry. So for many of us, this might be the first time we read a poem by Amanda Gorman that we are not also listening to her say out loud.
She said that she like was going to be on readers. It's almost like she has to like think about the way she describes things. Like I feel like her compared to Glenn Smith, she was like she writes like in a more universal way. And she even admitted she would use authors like use metaphors and make it more like relatable. Yeah. For like Glenn Smith, like if he was writing about his own experience, like it was almost like a form of protest where to like write about like this is my story, and he's not going to explain like, every bit. They're kind of like stuck in
How we thought that Amanda Gorman like imitates or like is inspired by older generations, but still trying to make her own without like using them for like her own way.
The heading really like helped explain what the chapter was about. It's a really like good book. It has like short chapters and like easy to read. I loved it. It was a little bit hard to start with the book because I wasn't really wanting to, but as soon as we started reading more chapters, I was very excited to read it every day. And I love the way that the author wrote the book, and I want to see if she writes any more books because I love the way she writes.
I like the way the book was set up. It was set up a little like very uniquely, and like I've never read a book with this set up, and I just thought I caught interest.
I liked how she like really explained like details, so you felt like you're in the book because you can tell what she's like trying to explain. Once we like got in the middle, like got into the middle of the book, it was like more addicting.
Okay, so I think you could see some of the excitement with the students about some of the new curriculum. And I think one of the things, and by the way, all three of those recordings took place during observations that I was involved in. And it was just, especially the last interview with the girls studying Brown Girl Dreaming, I just, decided to record them and ask them questions about what they were doing. And I have to say that you could see it was a very noisy room, but it was also a very focused room in which you could see that, you know, these texts are definitely having an impact on their thinking, on their level of engagement, and just on their overall interest. And you know, the conversations were really rich. So specifically in the middle schools, what the teachers have been working on, we began the year by sort of looking at some of the shifts that teachers are in the midst of or have already made, or, you know, and we talked specifically about some of the new resources and texts that have been adopted specifically, you know, because they're developed by traditionally marginalized voices or offer perspectives of, you know, marginalized experiences. And then also the other two that you see listed here as well. So, you know, we want to obviously always celebrate what's happening and what's going well, but we know that there's still a lot of work to do. And so the teachers each have specific goals that they've established for themselves that they're working on with grade level teams. So for example, you know, one of the teacher practices that's specifically outlined in the framework has to do with engaging students in youth participatory action research and, you know, teaching them, giving them opportunities to be agents of change. So providing opportunities for students to critically examine topics of power and privilege, striving to be culturally sustaining by centering identities of all students. These are all goals that teachers have that they're working on this year. And, you know, they're working with grade level teammates, and we have used some of our department time to look at resources and begin working on those goals. Next slide, please, Brian. So again, in the middle school, we began the year with as part of one of our shifts in looking at new resources was to go with a one book, one grade initiative. And so in the 6th grade, the students read The New Kid that you see here, and that they used that text to do an identity unit. And we're going to look at some resources from that in just a minute. As I already mentioned, the students you saw discussing at the table in the 7th grade classroom were reading Jacqueline Woodson's Brown Girl Dreaming. And that was the 7th grade text. And the 8th grade team chose a new book that we had not done at all, and that's called Other Words for Home. And they're right in the middle of that unit. And I have to say, I reached out to a few of them this week, and they're feeling really positive about this. And I think it's always challenging with a new book, but the feedback that I'm getting is great. So I'll be curious to see how they decide to tweak that unit and what grows out of it. So one of the tools I thought you might be interested in seeing that we used when we're looking at selecting new resources. You know, in the past, we sort of focused a lot of our efforts around the first consideration, complexity. And, you know, that's where you look at things like Lexile measurements and less quantitative measures as well. But this resource, which comes to us from Learning for Justice, which used to be called Teaching Tolerance, offers some other things to also look at: diversity and representation, reader and task considerations, and critical literacy. And if inside this document, I don't know if you can click on that PDF, please, Brian, just really quickly, I'll show you. So the teachers in the English department in the last few years have used this in many instances to examine books that we were considering. If you scroll down, Brian, you can see that this takes them through a whole process. And I just use it as an example to say that, you know, making shifts like this in a thoughtful way that's meaningful, you know, involves a lot of thinking and a lot of discussion and a lot of looking at discrete criteria. So we have used this as one of the tools to make some of those important decisions about the books that we're putting in front of kids. So you can see there's quite a few different components and questions. So this next slide showcases some of the work that was done in the 6th grade identity unit that I mentioned before. And I want to give credit to Ruth Rankin and Patty Farley, who did the lion's share of developing this unit. This specific activity right here is just a vocabulary kickstart, is a identity word splash that the students grouped together, where the students grouped together different words. And they did this in pairs and had to negotiate, you know, naming each group. And it's just a good kind of example of some of the new vocabulary words that have come into that teachers are using on things like word walls and that have grown out of this identity unit and out of this new text. And then another activity that I thought was really interesting that sort of speaks to the idea of how, you know, reading can shape our thinking and help us to make decisions and to see the world differently. So this was an activity that students completed before the identity unit in the 6th grade, specifically related to their beliefs about race. And you can see that, you know, they did it both before and after reading The New Kid and talking about the fictional character of Jordan Banks and how his experiences. So if you go to the next one, you can see how this in the student sample, how the students' thinking changed and how, for example, that first statement, you're more likely to feel comfortable around people who live like you do than people who live differently from you. He agreed with that, but then after reading, he felt differently about that issue and said that he disagreed. And you know, in all 3 cases, in these 3 examples of his thinking, you can see the shift. And specifically the evidence that he brings from the text and the ways in which, you know, the specific ways in which his thinking changed and why it changed. So I just thought that was a really great look at how reading fiction can really help kids to think about real world issues in new ways. And the high school English teachers are also collaborating. They're working in groups in 4 different teams. The first group is working on looking at equitable grading practices. As part of that work, they're reading parts of a text called Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman, and talking specifically right now, they're looking at data related to the Shaker High School practice of assigning students citizenship and effort grades and really drilling down to like who's getting what scores and thinking about, you know, what is the criteria that we're using to determine those things. Another group is looking at fostering high expectations and rigorous instruction. And, you know, specifically, they're looking at some of the practices and thinking about how we can broaden the canon but still keep a lot of the important content that they believe is important for rigorous instruction. The Identifying Inclusive Curriculum Assessment Group are specifically looking at some new text at each grade level, and they're interviewing students, they're having discussions about this. They're having a really good time, I think, and the kids are giving them great feedback. And then the last group is looking at teaching living poets and specifically, you know, how we can adopt more living poets and think about using the study of poetry as a way to move students towards social justice. So thank you. I don't want to go over my time because I know there's a lot more to come, but I'm really excited about all of the work in the English department related to the framework, and we will continue with that, you know, during department meetings and during workshop days and during collaboration times at the high school.
Thank you, Pam. And to the board, I apologize for not expanding the screen on the video. That was, I should have done that. Thank you for sharing that video, Pam. Mr. Polero.
Yes, and I'd like to just quickly thank the board for allowing us to come together tonight to talk about all the great things that we're doing. I'd also just like to take a second to introduce a couple special guest stars. And when I say stars, I really mean that because they've both been dynamic teachers involved in some of the processes you're going to hear about. First grade teacher from Blue Creek, Caitlin White, has been a huge assist and help to me in developing some of our K-2 units, and she'll be talking about that a little bit later. And Mr. Chris Meyer from 7th grade at the middle school, who did a tremendous amount of work as far as the media literacy part that we've brought in this year. Just a quick overview. I'm going to hit 4 key things tonight, outline them for you. One would be the new Regents exam. a bit of our work in the K-5 realm and continuing there with some assessment work, and talk a little bit more at the end about our culturally responsive and sustaining education work. Go ahead, Brian. Just to give you the quick history of the new U.S. history exam, for those of you that don't know, this is the Regents exam given at the end of 11th grade. It has been postponed. I'm talking about the new version of this Regents exam twice as a result of the pandemic. We had one assessment of the global history, new version of the exam. And since the pandemic has happened, as you know, all of the Regents exams have been postponed. So there are some shifts that really we've been preparing in the high school department for about 3 years now. Reduced emphasis on recall of facts from multiple choice questions. We've really been looking at something called a stimulus-based question, which I'll give you an example of here shortly. And the driving forces really, in terms of our instruction toward the exams, are getting at claims and using evidence from sources to drive student thinking and drive student responses to questions. Go ahead, Brian. I've just got a quick slide here about the old Regents exam in U.S. history, similar to what Global Studies did some 3 years ago now. On the left-hand side, formerly 50 multiple choice questions. Now we're looking at 28 questions that are all stimulus-based, which simply means that every multiple choice question, every short essay question, and the civic literacy has some sort of social studies stimulus based to it, whether it's a quote, a political cartoon, or a chart, or an image that students must respond to. There used to be 2 essays on the old exam, a longer thematic essay and a document-based essay. The new exam, instead of the thematic essay, features 2 shorter essays, again, based on a stimulus, and the question is designed to study the relationship between those sources as opposed to the exclusivity of those sources. And then there is a civic literacy essay that is similar to the DBQ. Students are given a series of stimuli, but instead of a question tied to each one of those stimuli that the students must respond to, they're instead tasked with finding the relationship among those resources without any short questions to go along with it. But the idea is that there is a constitutional or a civic problem tied to those sources that students then must demonstrate their knowledge of in their essay. Go ahead, Brian. This is a sample of a stimulus-based question that students might typically be faced with. This comes off of one of our midterm exams. And you can see there's a short excerpt from a Frederick Douglass passage, and then a short answer question that students have to answer. I want to point just for a moment, and not that I want everybody to be able to read through all this, but the intentionality here of having a Frederick Douglass document is something that goes along with some of the other work that we've been doing across social studies at various grade levels. And I will come back to that as we make our way through. Go ahead, Brian. Thank you. I want to shift for a second to the elementary curriculum and assessment. And this work really goes back to the end of last school year and over the summer. We've done a deep dive into the new framework curriculum, really K through 6. And the focus over the summer looking at the curriculum, making adjustments, shifting the focus to one of civic responsibility, civic literacy, good citizenship has been paramount in driving that. We're in the process of creating grade level documents at really K to 3. I'd like to kind of ask Caitlin to jump in here. And Caitlin, do you want to go to the slides or do you want to go to the guiding document?
The slides would be great. Okay. I just want to thank you for having me, and I'm very excited to be talking about all the work we've been doing. So this year, we've been working on building a quality social studies curriculum, and we've tried to interweave reading skills. We really focused on finding diverse text, and we have dug deep into the standards. So something that we created was a PowerPoint that you see here, and it outlines each standard and includes a variety of different diverse texts. So we have nonfiction, such as our scholastic news text, we have fiction, and we tried to do our best to make sure that we represented everyone that we see in our classroom and beyond. Diversifying the text was a big push for us as teachers and as believers that even young first graders can make change. So that's something that we really strive to get through and tried to make this as teacher friendly too as possible so that we were reaching as many teachers with this quality social studies curriculum. So you can see on the slide some of the different materials that we found, as well as diverse texts. We made a text list as well so that we could try to get all classrooms to have these really quality texts in their rooms. And we included different videos, different activities, and connected it all to central themes such as citizenship, community, we have geography in there and economics as well. So it was just it's been really great. We continue to add to it as we go through our year and we find what's working well, or hey, there's a new book. I know in my class, we really did a deep dive on families this year, and we talked about names, but instead of just using the typical chrysanthemum book, we used Your Name is a Song, and we also used Alma and how she got her name. So we tried to diversify the text instead of just going back to those age-old books that we were all kind of grown up on. We've done really good deep dives into the standards as well to make sure that the curriculum was covering the standards, because that was really important to us, that we felt like we wanted to do. That's what we've been working on.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Deneen. Shifting back and forth, expert job. The other part of this is a guiding document resource that at all grade levels, K through 3, we are putting together for teachers. We've had teachers from representation around the district. So getting creative ideas, getting resources from various perspectives has been super helpful in terms of creating a kind of living document that we're hoping to build into a one-stop shop for teachers that is indicative of the standards, but as well as some of the guiding questions or read aloud books or just creative thinking about how to approach a certain topic and building that right into the document. We, at all levels, I know Caitlin kind of mentioned the representation, but this goes back to what I was talking about with the Frederick Douglass quote, being very intentional in terms of our sources, our authors, diversifying book lists at every level to try to make sure that we're incorporating marginalized voices that throughout history have typically been ones left out of the history. So we're trying to make those voices more apparent and be a little bit more intentional in how we're choosing to portray the history. In grades 4, 5, and 6, also back to the summer, I started with the question to the teachers about how we can look at different ways to incorporate social studies in terms of our assessment and the skills of literacy as well as writing. And we ended up building common assessments at all 3 of those grades. And we're going to continue to use this year as a baseline measurement for all of the elementaries and the middle school to gauge where we're at in terms of our social studies instruction at those levels, and then to review and revise what we need to think about moving forward based on how individual students, are doing on these common assessment types that we tried to model off of the new Regents questions. Go ahead, Brian.
Don't get into the guiding document, just next slide.
Yeah, you don't have to click on it. That's okay. I'm going to shift back to the high school and get into some of the work, or secondary, I guess, and get back into some of the work around the culturally sustaining framework. We've, again, been very intentional about our representation in terms of the groups that, the voices that we're selecting into our history, and how many of these voices come together across a multitude of aspects. And what I started to do this September was to create some study groups out of department meetings, and kind of forcing our work a little bit to look more critically at the historical curriculum in certain areas, both in global studies and in U.S. history, and attacking these historical topics from different perspectives and different viewpoints. And as you can see, many of these are what we would typically call kind of controversial topics. So we want to make sure we're clear and thoughtful in how we're representing all of the groups. But I've been trying to make the point to the department, and I'm hoping that doing this work here will kind of culminate as we get to our 12th grade electives, that are really, I want to make those into a kind of culminating course of study for students as they think about and reflect on some of these topics that are typically, may not be as focused in their typical class of studies as they should be. So go ahead, Brian. On the November workshop day was really the department's first introduction to the framework. I had the teachers start off with a prompt. When I envision social studies, this is what I see. From there, I had put together a little video about what I saw in social studies and had the teachers view that. From there, I gave the department some of the different instructional moves that came from the framework. And the 2 that came up most frequently that teachers identified to me as ones they would like to do more of, learn more about, and try to engage more in throughout the course of this year were these 2 that, again, to get into more conversations about what we might think of as controversial topics, but try to engage with those in a proactive and responsible way. as well as feature and highlight resources written by marginalized voices. Again, that theme is coming up a lot in social studies, and it should be, because it's the content area that typically has this as its backdrop. So I think it's an important thing to note that the teachers self-selected this as a key part of our department moving forward. Yep, go ahead, Brian. So with that, these are snapshots from the 12th grade elective courses and some presentations that students had created from different subjects. Represented here is the environmental studies, the inequality and economics course, as well as the women's gender studies course. So students are and feeling more comfortable and confident in dealing with some of the topics and trying to have the teachers focus in terms of representation, but the intersection of where our society and our culture comes together and to why these topics are controversial and what students can hopefully do when they leave us to correct some of their own challenges or correct some of their own thinking and formulate hopefully some positive opinions and positive citizenship as they move forward. And one last slide. This is just, this is a little project of mine. This has been the first year since I have officially removed all prerequisites from social studies AP and honors level courses. And although this is really just baseline data for me, I think it's important to look at the representation. And again, this comes from Infinite Campus. So this is families and our students self-representing where they see themselves ethnically. But you can see the vast disparity between all other groups and our white and our Asian population and the representation in our top level courses in social studies. And obviously moving forward, this is something in terms of addressing, but also what the results of these are in terms of those courses, and really how to mitigate this and going forward. And I can honestly say I'm not aware of answers at this point, but it's certainly something I want to keep looking at in the years to come. So thank you very much, and I appreciate everyone's time tonight.
Thank you, Bob. After our overviews of ELA and for social studies, we underwent a curriculum work led by Kelly Weatherby, Bob, and Pam, all about media literacy and looking at it, what it will be in the future at K-12. And Kelly's going to take time now to walk you through that work, talk to you about the obvious importance of media literacy, and then we'll also be able to take a look at our libraries and where we currently stand and where we're headed. Ms. Weatherby.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you again to the board for allowing us to come in and talk a bit about something I'm very passionate about, and certainly, and that is media literacy. I opened this slide with a quote from Dr. Barbara Stripling, and she is a woman who's been a leader in developing the information fluency continuum that we used as a guide. She's a past president of the American Library Association and was head of the library system in the New York City education system. But her quote here, I think, is important. It says, "It's our mission as school librarians and educators to prepare each one of our students to develop the skills and agency to be both critical consumers and creators of information as they navigate and succeed in their academic and personal lives." So what I'm going to do tonight, as opposed to what Bob and Pam have done, where they have actually been able to report out, we're really going to talk about why, what is media literacy education? Why is it important? And, what are the experts and what does the data tell us? And then lastly, what does our current curriculum look like? And, how would we like to move forward to expand it even further? So just to start, and I apologize, I'm sure many of you already know all of this in terms of a definition, but, and I'm not going to read through this whole page, but media literacy does encompass a pretty broad range of skills that we would want to teach students. We start with digital literacy, talking about, how to interact appropriately with the information that they're encountering online, understanding, what this information is, how it might affect their behavior, and just becoming much more comfortable with understanding what's happening in that little phone and computer they're carrying around with them. Information literacy is something that we have historically associated more with school librarians, where we would have our students come in to do a research project. We would talk to them about sourcing their, finding good sources, how to develop find a quality source. It is so much bigger than that now, but that is one component of media literacy. Next is the news literacy part, and that is so important as a citizen for these young people who are going to grow up, become voters. How do they find the good, solid, verified information versus spin, opinion, propaganda? We need to provide them with the tools to do that. Visual literacy is becoming increasingly important because I receive these pieces of information every week from the News Literacy Project. And it's an Instagram, let's say, that someone has posted. And it looks like what they're saying would go along with the visual that's in front of you. But if you took time and really examined the visual, looked at the buildings that are there, looked at the season of the year, you can decode things like an Instagram post just by knowing how to develop those visual literacy skills. So that's something we need to do. And last, but certainly not least, but incredibly important, is to help students to understand, the use and the safe use of technology and the digital footprint that they leave when they are out on the internet. So these are all encompassing. I mean, they all kind of intermingle together when we're doing work with students, but this is, kind of our broadest definition. So go on to the next page. Just to give you a little bit of background and, in terms of being able to look at the data, smartphone use and ownership has just gone up astronomically. And these numbers only go through 2019. I tried very hard to find more updated data. I assume the pandemic had something to do with not being able to access and get some of this data. But, you even look at something as young as an 8-year-old. 19% of 8-year-olds own their own smartphone. And that number just continues to skyrocket. We're up to 91% once they hit 18 years of age. So maybe it's not something that you would have, or maybe you already felt you knew that. I was kind of shocked that at the younger years, so many students have smartphones. But if we could go on. The bigger concern is the amount of time students are spending on phones. 4 hours and 44 minutes for a middle school student is an awful lot of time spent on phones. And as you can see over on the right-hand side, it's a little bit higher in lower incomes, in lower income homes than in higher income homes. Teenagers are spending 7 hours and 22 minutes. So what that is saying to all of us, and I know Mr. Kaur said this when he pulled our group together and said he wanted us to develop this curriculum, was that it's really a moral imperative that, we have this curriculum brought to our students so that they leave knowing how to interact with this device that they're spending so many hours on. And we would certainly know that 7 hour and 22 minutes which again came from 2019, has only risen dramatically during this time of pandemic. Brian, if we could go on. This next page is just simply showing you how it's an ever-changing environment. Back in 2015, Facebook was the biggest place for teenagers to go. Now, you can't even say the word Facebook to a teenager. They just think that's just for the old people. So if you go over here to the 2019 data, and this is from Pew Research, YouTube there is predominant as the largest form of social media that they are looking at, or online platform. Today, I would have to believe, and I don't have the data to back it, at hand, but I would have to think that TikTok has to be either surpassing that or, very close behind YouTube. It's just become huge. So again, what have we done as educators to be able to sit down and teach students very explicitly how to understand what they're seeing, how to interact with what's in front of them? We just haven't had the opportunity to do that. And lastly, that one last quote down here on the bottom, 45% of teens are online on a near constant basis. So again, I think the need is certainly apparent. If we could go on to the next. So teens and news. Interestingly enough, almost 80% of teens, 13 to 17-year-olds, really do want to follow current events and are interested in following current events. They are getting their news most frequently from social media sites or from people on YouTube, rather than getting it from subscribing to the New York Times on their phone or getting some sort of news feed into their phones. And what's interesting is that 60% of the teens who are getting it on YouTube are getting it from celebrities or influencers or personalities, compared to only 39% who are getting it from actual news organizations. Again, that's worrisome. What are the celebrities or the influencers or the personalities? What are their credentials to provide this news information to our teenagers? So again, just another piece of supporting evidence. And I put this quote in here because Ms. Skeels had sort of taken it out of a piece of research she had found and found it to be a sort of a guiding principle that we could use as we pulled our curriculum together. And I'm just going to read it very quickly, but information literacy is the basis for civic engagement, agency, and action. Our students are inheriting the largest and most complex information landscape in human history, and the medium is constantly changing. We cannot assume that the skills students use to decode a text are sufficient in sorting through information and misinformation, which is constantly confronting them. It is our responsibility to explicitly teach them the skills necessary to analyze, question, and evaluate information in order to exercise their civic responsibility. Now, interestingly enough, we do not have at a state level media literacy standards. We hope to at some point, but right now we don't. Many of the standards are embedded into other curriculum, but what we wanted to do is at least take what we know is a solid framework for it, and that is with the information fluency continuum, and develop our own curriculum. So if you could just go forward, Brian. This is just sort of a reiteration of what we just saw, so I can skip right through that. Again, I don't want to read all of these, but I just put in for your information just to reinforce the importance. Learning for Justice, the former Teaching Tolerance organization, again, came in talking about how we have to look at digital literacy across all curriculums and all subject areas. Dr. Joel Breakstone from the Stanford History Education Group is talking about that the tools that we use oftentimes to teach these skills are kind of outdated. We need to stay on top of it and update, because the technology and the way that information is coming at our students is constantly changing, and we just have to stay up with it. And then again, looking at finally on an expert opinion, Whitney Phillips wrote this particular quote right after George Floyd's shooting back in 2020. And she is a professor of communications and rhetoric out at Syracuse University. And she specifically was talking about thinking about what we decide to share and working with students about, that the disinformation and it's not just that the dis and the misinformation is bad. It's about the harm it can cause people, and it's about who it harms. And then more often than not, it is harming people, who are, that are more often not able, are more marginalized groups, and that it really has become a social justice issue in terms of making sure that we are teaching this. So next page. So if you could just click on the information fluency continuum, right on that picture, and it'll open right up. This is the framework that we used as our guide when we put the curriculum together. And if you scroll down a little bit, we just looked through and we picked out what we thought were our kind of like our priority, the skills that we wanted our students to have, and developed our own framework. There were some things in here that we felt we were getting in other areas of our curriculum, so we didn't need to just re-add it to the information or the media literacy curriculum. So we focused more on those areas that we felt were most important. So if you go back to the go back to our slide presentation and look at the Shaker Middle School curriculum, this is the curriculum that Mr. Kaur and Ms. Skeels asked Bob and Pam and myself to work on. And so we color coded it in the end in terms of the lessons that we felt were most important, what grade levels they would work best with. And some of them are fine across the whole spectrum of grades 6 through 8. But again, we structured it with an essential question. We then had teacher resources. We had lesson plans over on the right. So we wanted to make this as user-friendly and as easy to just sort of launch into. And you'll see right here where it says standard 2.2, information fluent learners present their learning and ideas by constructing messages using multiple and authentic formats. So as you look through this document, you'll see the actual standards that we implemented and the supporting information that we provided to teachers to be able to teach these lessons, as easily as possible. The last lesson or the last section is all about being a good digital citizen. And it focuses quite a bit on, understanding your digital footprint and where, what you're doing when you're actually out there interacting with the technology. Now, if you could scroll up one more, just a little bit there, Brian, that third, it says right there, standard 3.3, information fluent learners demonstrate digital citizenship by maintaining ethical decision-making and behavior and avoiding the spread of misinformation and exchange and the exchange and use of information. So, again, that's a big part of what we want to teach our students as well. So, I was not in, we worked together to put the curriculum together. If you could go back to the board presentation, Brian, that'd be great. Just a couple of things. It's vertically aligned. It's 6 through 8 now. It can easily go 6 through 12 and ultimately K-12. We want the whole curriculum to go. It incorporates a lot of the ITSE standards, so are embedded in there as well. At the high school, we right now we continue to work with students when the teachers bring their classes into the library to work on research with them. The problem with the model as it stands right now is that we miss a lot of students. We just don't get to everyone. So as we plan to roll out our program for next year, You know, we're looking at a bunch of possibilities. These are, you know, these will be planned by, you know, the administrators, but some of the things that we're thinking about are developing specific curriculum that can be incorporated into ELA and social studies classes where we would co-teach the librarian and the specific classroom teacher. Maybe it's 1 quarter, maybe it's a semester. Develop modules that can be taken and put into any you know, number of subject areas. Developing PD so teachers can feel more confident and comfortable themselves in teaching this. I mean, this is the curriculum of the media literacies teachers and the librarians in the district. You know, we're still kind of in the works on what was going to look like at the high school next year. That's it.
All right. Thank you very much, Kelly, for that overview. There's a great deal of work that has gone into this. And now we're going to talk to Jessica Lansing, who's our lead librarian and works at Forts Ferry. So she can talk to you a little bit about what it looks like with our youngest learners in elementary school.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having us here tonight to tell you a little bit about what's going on in the libraries. So I'll be sharing a glimpse of what media literacy looks like at the elementary level in our North Colony schools tonight. So our focus, if you could go back, Brian, we'll just keep that up. Yeah, yep. Our focus is mainly on information literacy and digital literacy at the elementary level. We want our students to understand that they have responsibilities when using technology, and we build the foundational skills for research, like finding trusted sources, asking questions, and giving credit to where we get our information from. So media literacy is mentioned in several sets of the standards and resources that our librarians use to develop our curriculum. So as Kelly mentioned, the information fluency continuum, it includes first graders working in groups to interpret charts of information gathered through research. They write that second grade can cite a source with an author and a title. Third grade would be observing internet safety procedures. Fourth grade, learning to protect their passwords. And fifth grade, working collaboratively with technology for research to meet their information needs. So right there written into our information fluency continuum standards at the K-5 level, we have those building blocks starting. And then in our national school library standards, they state that students will make meaning by making critical choices about information sources to use and perform ongoing analysis and reflection in the quality, usefulness, and accuracy of resources. Then the last resource I wanted to highlight is Common Sense Media, which is where Kelly got most of her charts and stuff from earlier in the presentation. So they provide a framework for the K-12 digital citizen curriculum, and our librarians reference that when we are looking at our own curriculum. So on the screen here, we can see these are just the general topics that we cover in our K-5 curriculum. So again, at this level, we're really stressing the importance of our students' responsibilities when they're online, along with their digital footprint that they're creating when they're sharing information. And we want our students to reflect on their own balance between time spent online and offline. And really, we just want them to be more in the driver's seat with their digital lives and understanding the role that they play. We also have conversations with our students about the difference between a website and a database and how databases provide us with the most up-to-date, accurate information on such a broad range of topics. And it's really what they should be using rather than hopping on Google, which they're so used to and comfortable doing. So by building this foundation at the elementary level, we feel our students will be more prepared for the in-depth media literacy instruction that Kelly was referencing that will follow in middle and high school. So next I have just a couple examples. So first we have second grade, and this is an example of a digital literacy lesson that comes from Common Sense Media. And it talks about being a good digital citizen. So as seen on this slide, this is a video that would be shared with the class, followed by a discussion about the role that students play when they're online. And the lesson points out a comparison for the students to make between thinking about their responsibilities that they have at home, to their families, and also to themselves, and then the role that they play in the larger community or in their classroom. So this concept is called the rings of responsibility. And I'm just gonna play this, or Brian, you can play that very quick, cute.
We, the digital citizens, with our hands up in the air, pledge to travel safely when we click from here to there. To see the world, you don't always need a plane, a giant yellow school bus, or a noisy train. You just need the internet and something with the screen to see a different country or a pretty ocean scene. If you've ever seen a sloth or a pick of Eddie Sue, just go online and check them out. Remember what to do. Always ask a grown-up before you go online. It's good to set a limit and keep track of your time. That's right. Keep your info private, like your name and your address. Right. And always find a grown-up if you're scared or you're stressed. If you want to see the world, you don't always need a plane, a giant yellow school bus, or a noisy train. You just need the internet and something with the screen to play an awesome puzzle game or watch a soccer team. So go online and check them out. Remember what to do, to do, to do, to do. Always pause and think when visiting a site. Only talk to friends you know and never start a fight. Okay. It's fun to have a screen to laugh and play with friends, but if it's nice, go outside and find the rainbow's end. If you want to see the world, you don't always need a plane, a giant yellow school bus, or a noisy train. You just need the internet and something with the screen to be a part of something great, whatever you can dream. Remember that you took this pledge to be your best online. So stick with the Dig citizens, and together you will shine.
So yes, a little silly, but that's what media literacy will look like and does look like at our youngest levels. So next I had an example lesson. This is an information literacy lesson, and Mrs. Gable at Latham Ridge shared this with me. Brian, if you just want to skip one ahead. Just one slide ahead, Brian.
I'm trying. I'm hitting.
Okay. So Laura Gable was doing a research project with her third graders, and their goal was to do research and take notes in their own words. So she stressed using bullet notes, as you can see on her examples there, and keywords. So they used Pebble Go, which is one of our library's databases, to read and listen to one section at a time. And then she asked them to minimize their screen and jot down as many facts as they could remember. So students also discussed the concept of a library database, and they knew that it was a trusted source that Mrs. Gable was providing them to use for this project. So this lesson encouraged the students to use their own words and paraphrase rather than copying down word from their source. And then finally, I have a news literacy lesson for fifth graders, again from Common Sense Media. And this introduces students to vocabulary like headline, advertisement, URL, byline, etc. Different parts of a news article that we understand and we know where to find and we know what they mean. I think that we assume that our students, because they always have their phones in their hands, I know that they think they know what all those things mean too, but this lesson explicitly teaches those vocabulary words, and the students then are tasked with reading the brief news article, identifying the different parts, and then labeling where they are in the article. So this lesson prepares students to look for these parts when they're reading news online, and it also sets the stage for them to develop deeper media literacy skills that will come with Debbie, who's next, who will be talking about what's going on at Shaker Middle School. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Jessica.
Hey,
Sorry, Debbie, go ahead. I apologize.
no, that's okay. I was going to say, do you want to introduce me? Should I introduce me?
I'm happy to have Debbie Armbrust here from our middle school, one of our 2 librarians. And like Jessica said, she will take us from 5th grade right up to 6th.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. It is one of my pleasures to talk about libraries and the wonderful things that we do. So this is such a treat. We're that interesting transitional period from elementary over to the high school. And we end up reteaching a lot of, like, just revisiting a lot of those skills that are talked about in elementary library. Actually very similar to the note-taking that Laura Gable had done with her kiddos at Latham Ridge. We do a lot of very similar things in the middle school. We focus very heavily on digital resources and talking to kids about how they are so incredibly up to date and one of the best places to go. But also there's that big switch from elementary to middle school where we're a fully flexible co-teaching environment. So it's all lessons are taught by the librarian and the content teacher who's come in to work with us. So rather than a set scheduled library period, it's a flexible schedule. So if you want to hop ahead, that'd be wonderful. Oh, thank you. Some of the real positives for this is coming back together, rekindling those relationships, building new relationships with our 6th grade teachers who have come into the middle school. Pandemic really threw us off, so it is a wonderful opportunity to get back together. People have been very excited to do it, and it really brings media literacy to the table, especially in that co-taught environment where we're always, muscling with the content area teacher for getting those media literacy skills in there. It's been a wonderful way to really push it front and center. And some of the really exciting things are that as we've gone through this, I've been thinking of all the other curricular areas that we can start pushing media literacy into. So approaches to how we've gotten this done. We looked at the document, which was beautifully put together, looked at that it's 10 pages long and super daunting, but then breaking it down with teachers into ways that this makes sense for our rollout. And we are pretty much right on schedule. Where we've had some collaborations, we're building toward other ones, and hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have all 6th, 7th, and 8th grade represented. So there have been special kind of large pull-out lessons where teachers budgeted a week and a half to, we're gonna hit media literacy, we're gonna try to hit everything on our checklist. And then there were other teachers who said, you know what, let's do this piecemeal. We'll do little bits of it as we go along, and then by the end we'll have hit everything. And it's the flexibility of the curriculum that was laid out to us, which really lent itself well to working in the middle school environment. If we could hop to the next one. Beautiful. So here's one of our examples. This was actually the very first digital media literacy lessons that was taught. And it was originally Skylight 7, Social Studies in ELA, and now Haystack is also going to do a similar project, where it's a multi-day lesson looking at everything from that basic website evaluation checklist, looking at information sources, talking about historical spread of misinformation, confirmation bias, fact-checking, and it was a wonderful jump-off point where the kids were very actively engaged in it. And even things like the bias and confirmation bias, looking at those 2 examples, which one do you automatically want to go for and why? And then looking at both of them and figuring out what actually makes sense. So that was one lesson. If you hop along, beautiful. This one, this is Algonquin and Skylight 6 Social Studies. This lesson is actually part of a long string of lessons that are building us to a, not a passion project, but it's, well, no, maybe it is a passion project that's going to be happening in the spring, where the kids are going to look at something that they very strongly believe in, and they're going to be looking at a lot of media and where it lives in our media. And so it's building up to a really huge project. So in this one, it's ancient Egypt. They're looking for reliable and verifiable sources of information, print, web, and digital. We had to circle back to note-taking and citation, because some of those skills the kids had lost during that time away from traditional instruction. And building everything into an informative presentation with an audience of their peers in mind. So that was something we did. The verifiable sourcing, definitely it's that lateral reading idea. Wright and Haystack are going to be doing social studies and ELA, ancient Egyptian research, where they're also focusing on lateral reading. And ultimately, they're going to create a collaborative virtual museum where they'll showcase all of the information that they found. Algonquin Social Studies in ELA 7 is going to be doing a research PSA about how territorial expansion impacts the lives of people. One of the things that we're really excited for in this is that the students are going to look at both sides of the issue. And then they're going to develop a claim-based argument based on all of the information that they've gathered. And finally, Wright ELA and Social Studies 8 is going to be looking at media literacy and visual literacy through World War II Nazi propaganda and modern day propaganda. So there'll be fact checking, looking at bias, impact of social media on the spread of misinformation and propaganda. So we're really excited. We're in the very early stages, but very excited to see where it goes.
Debbie, thank you. As Debbie just alluded to, this curriculum work that was started just over a year ago is now starting to unroll in our middle school. So you saw some examples of what has happened and what is to happen in the coming months. So we wanted to make sure you could get a better idea of what is happening. We touched on a lot of information over 75 minutes. So first off, thank you to all the board for listening. And any of these topics themselves could be a longer discussion. So I did tell the group that you may have follow-up questions or thoughts or comments, but tonight we do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this work and how it impacts our students every day.
We will get a copy of this, won't we? This presentation?
We'd love
We
to share
usually
a copy.
do.
Absolutely.
Okay, because as you say, there really is a lot. And, when we were going through it, I missed some things that I wanted to take a better look at. So I was sure that you were going to send it, but I thought I'd ask you anyway.
We will make sure that we have it tomorrow for you.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Great work. Great work. That media literacy work is outstanding. Never needed more. Mm-hmm. Ever. It's wonderful. I always like seeing students doing what they do. I always love that. Mm-hmm. And that one student from, I think it was the middle school, when she said, I felt like I was in the book. Oh my gosh. I thought that was the greatest. That's a great statement. I just love it. I thought also the media literacy, I guess it was Laura Gable's students, the exercise she had them do, that's excellent. I mean, really, what a difference all of this is going to make for kids and for learning. I just love it all. But anyway, I'm sure everybody else loves it. So why, any questions? I mean, it's Nick and it's Sam. You can,
I have a couple of questions, as always, I guess. The first one was fairly early on. You discussed the middle school transitioning to the idea of one book, 1 year, which I like, right? There's a consistency. All of the students see the same book, regardless of what hall they're in and things like that. Do you plan on changing those up year to year, or are you going to stick with one for a few years, find something along those lines, or change it up every year? I don't know.
That's a great question. And I think I can say pretty assuredly that for next year, we would do the same books because the teachers kind of wanted some more time to work with them. But I like the idea of changing it up.
I mean, I can imagine it's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it is a lot of work, but it's still a good way to keep adding new text to the repertoire. And it doesn't mean that we have to teach them all every year, right? So now they've got these new, the challenge with some of these books is that they're about cultures and places that the teachers don't necessarily have experience talking about. So it takes some time to develop those skills. And I know that we want to be thoughtful and intentional and sensitive to everyone. And so I think one of the most important things, and we've talked a lot about this as a department, is to go back after the units are over, like the 8th grade team, for example, is teaching this book, and really, spend some time together debriefing and talking about and sharing resources. And the teachers always share resources. They're great about that. But, what was the experience like? And this, in each case, this is just one of the books that we do throughout the course of the year. So it's, there's obviously a lot of other texts being taught, but we just thought specifically this year with the middle school and everybody kind of coming back to in-person learning, it could be a team building kind of community activity. And I really think it was, particularly at the 6th grade level.
Great, thank you. I had a question about the digital media literacy, particularly as it comes to dealing with what technology the kids are using. Are we realistically going to be able to keep up with this? I mean, it has to change year to year. And I know, I grew up on, well, not grew up exactly, but like Facebook came out when I was in college and I don't know how to use it anymore. And that's, kids pick it up so quickly and there's a new thing every year. Are we providing enough professional development to the teachers to be able to make them not feel like they're overwhelmed year after year having to pick up whatever the newest thing is?
I would say this. I would say that media literacy, fortunately, and this is the way it should be, is not technology specific. It's mindset setting, if you will. And so therefore, what the skills of looking at bias, of looking at sourcing and so on are fundamental and paramount to keeping up with the different social media that will evolve along the way. I think your point is a really good one. I think in terms of keeping up with what kids are using, but I think those skills that are being taught in media literacy really are constant and really transcend a particular social media platform.
Okay.
And I think if I could jump in, I'm not an administrator, but I would just say that I think that we can, keep up by at least the people who are in the building. I think, we have an expert in every building with the librarian, and then if they stay as up to date as possible, and then are able to then provide that information to the teachers. I'm constantly getting more and more PD myself with, how to decode these videos, the deep fakes that are made, that, that's the kind of thing that we just need to stay up on top of. And then as Joe said, we'll make sure that those skills can be applied on YouTube, on TikTok, on all kinds of platforms. And so it's hard, and it takes a lot of focused effort to do it, but I think it can be done. And I would say, it's really important that it be done.
Okay. And then
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there's also a whole group of teachers who are part of, they used to be called TRTs, and forgive me, I've lost track of the acronym. But they are, I'm sure they're really technological kind of experts. So they bring that expertise. So just in terms of that technical part of it, they're constantly offering, PD to their colleagues and really heavily involved in keeping up with it for the rest of us who might be 4 steps behind, so that's another huge teacher leadership piece.
As kind of a follow-up question then to that, and this lines up nicely. Ms. Lansing, you mentioned things like teaching password management to kids, which is, I'm sure, remarkably difficult. And do we make sure that what's being taught to those students lines up with the practices they're seeing in place in the classroom? I mean, I would hate for them to go and get a wonderful program in the library and then find out that their teacher has emailed out the password list to the class or something like that. Just in terms of having consistency across what they see from all of the adults in the building.
I can speak from my experience in my building that I think the knowledge that teachers have of the media literacy skills that we've just talked about tonight is all over the board.
Okay.
But that being said, it is, as librarians, we always strive to collaborate with our colleagues, and we are always keeping them aware of what we're talking about with the students. And sometimes I find it, a teachable moment when the teacher comes to pick up the class and I can let her know or him know what we covered in class today. Oh, we talked about passwords, and they can tell you what they just learned about how to create a safe password and not to share their passwords. So I think it's like in those little teachable moments, we can kind of help to get everyone on the same page, but also PD, I think that's very important too. And I had just shared a PD that's being put on by BOCES in March that is through Project Look Sharp, which I know is an organization that Kelly has worked a lot with. They develop media literacy curriculum. So I know I plan on attending, and I'm urging my librarian colleagues to attend. But I do think teachers should be attending this too, because like you said, if there's that disconnect, we're not really sending a uniform message. So that's just my 2 cents.
I was just thinking about something, maybe about a decade ago, it could have been longer because I've lost all track of time. There was a move afoot because of budgetary reasons to eliminate librarians. And I know I have board members who remember that, and Mr. Quarry, not here in North Colony. We've always been respectful of those librarian positions, but you remember there was a move afoot. We don't need as many librarians. And I just think about Mary Ellen Roth, who was a long-term board member, and what respect we had for her and her work as a librarian in North Colony. And I just want to say, I don't think librarians have never been more important to us in terms of the work that we have to do with our students. And I think librarians throughout the country are doing heroic work in terms of their school districts. And so that's just a shout out to you, because I just felt like doing it. I measure my words. It's truly heroic work. And it's not, and I always say this, whenever teachers come before us to talk about whether it's literacy, whatever, this is hard work. It's hard work for everybody. And, as a board, we understand that, and, we appreciate it, but we know it's hard. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mrs. Harrison, if I can just jump in and say, we are incredibly grateful that in North Colony, our board has always supported librarians in all of our buildings.
We have.
It is not required still to this day by the state of New York to have elementary librarians. So there is legislation out there, and there is lobbying going on to make it a requirement, because having a room with books in it is not the same as having a library program and a skilled librarian. And it is one of those things where the rich get richer sometimes. So when lobbying day comes around and things like that, you know, we certainly see it as essential in terms of equity across the state for what students have access to.
Absolutely. Yep.
I just add something to what Mrs. Harrison just said. And I agree with everything that she said, especially the librarians. I also want to add that I sat here tonight as I was listening to the presentation, thinking how fortunate we are to have the staff and the departments offer professional development to each other.
That's
And
right.
that's another thing that I know we have had questions during budgetary times, you know, when we had difficult times, the professional development piece. And I think it is really commendable and remarkable how you have worked together with each other, sharing resources, selecting texts. It's all good work. And thank you all for that because it's much appreciated.
And Ms. Marillo, that takes many different forms. Jessica just mentioned, we put out the link today for the BOCES March Professional Development for Librarians about media literacy because it's clearly relevant. And tomorrow, Pam and our instructional coaches will be leading a couple-hour professional development with all fourth grade teachers across the district to talk about literacy and instructional practice. So again, you know, we appreciate you recognizing the importance of that work, and we sure are trying to find every corner of the district that we can and or out of district if need be, so that we can continue that learning. It's impactful.
I know, are there any other board member questions or comments?
Yeah, actually, I just had a few quick comments. So it was actually interesting with what Kathy just said about the whole not required for elementary school librarian things. Actually, I was a teacher up until 3 weeks ago. I just became an assistant principal at an elementary school, and I was kind of blown away that we didn't have a librarian. I'm in the Schenectady City School District, and a bunch of the schools there, half of them have librarians, half don't, or they're like at 0.4 at this school, 0.3 here. So it was just kind of interesting to see how just kind of unequal it is, where my school is the second or third largest elementary school, but we don't have a librarian at all. But some of the smaller schools, they might have a 0.2 or 0.4. So just kind of interesting, and just to see in the classrooms I've been doing a lot of walkthroughs in, of how like they're missing that kind of the media piece, that like just the social media part of knowing what's right and what's wrong, because I've had to do some discipline investigations with the poor use of social media. And so it was just kind of interesting to see that comment that Kathy made earlier. And then in terms of one of the big questions I had was actually answered, was how is there set for collaboration? But I saw a lot with the middle school that they have some of the cross-curricular collaboration where they're going into the library. They're doing like an ELA social studies project throughout the entire hall, which is always something when I was a teacher, I would always try to do. When I was at Troy Middle School, I kind of led using like a multimedia project with the librarian myself. So I found that that was one of my big kind of questions when I read ahead to see like how much time is put into it. So it seems like there's a lot of time, which is something personally I like to see with the whole cross-curricular idea. And then actually, so a final kind of like a question I had when they were going through the media literacy course or like just the media literacy for the high school, it wasn't kind of set. Is it going to be like a module? Is it going to be like a set curriculum? So is it going to be, I know this again might not be set, but is it going to be where it's kind of, they have like a certain department like ELA in this month is going to go work on this lesson, or is it going to be just kind of up to the teacher to kind of, hey, we're going to go to the library to get this lesson done? Or is there going to be any kind of clear idea of what they're going to do for the high school for the literacy part, like the media literacy with the library? Again, this could just be like an early kind of question. It was touched on a little bit in the presentation, that was something I was still kind of thinking about afterwards.
I can start the discussion, but I think others will probably pick it up. Bob and Pam, and we're talking about it, the three of us, about how to, that it could be a class. I think what we want to do is make sure we hit everyone. And that's the key. And so how do we get that to happen? And because the problem with even though we have a very active library and we have many teachers collaborating with us on projects, we don't know that we're getting everyone and that we're getting all of the skills we want to get presented. So, but that's something that I know the administrators are going to kind of hash out how best to make that happen. Sorry, go ahead, Bob.
I was just going to jump in and say, we have a media and politics course that's a 12th grade elective, but I think what we've talked about and have kind of emphasized doing is, as we transition, trickling up to the high school as well as trickling down to the elementary with the curriculum, are involving those teachers in the development of how we present it to the larger body. And everybody does it sort of in their own particular fashion to some degree, but it's really what we're trying to build here are habits, habits of mind from first grade, kindergarten, as Kelly was presenting. We're talking about first graders and second graders, 8-year-olds with cell phones. We want them practicing consistent habits with whatever platform. So how do we, best use our resources, which frankly, we can develop a curriculum, but it's the teachers and the librarians that are key to implementing it. So we certainly want to include them in our discussions, and maybe the shape that it takes are all of the different ways that we can present it, from the classes that we have to using the librarians to providing exemplar modules that somebody could take and work with. So I think, we're really looking for what are those consistent habits of mind that it doesn't matter where or when, but that student, whether they're in high school or whether they're 25, they're thinking consciously about, what am I clicking on? What am I seeing? And am I acting responsibly when I'm making those choices? And so theoretically, we're really trying to build those kinds of consistent habits across the board.
Thanks, Bob. And what I was going to say is, Nick, I think it's a really great question, because I think when we first started talking about this, and Kelly, this was a couple of years ago, but there was some thought that New York State was even going to have this as a requirement, as a graduation requirement, perhaps, that all students had to have a course in media literacy, which is obviously a very valid set of skills that they need. That doesn't look like it's going to come to fruition. So we have been batting around, what are the different ways that we could have it happen in the high school? We thought about making it an elective, but again, that's the problem with electives: who can get in their schedule, who can fit it in, who takes it, when it's something that I think, as everybody recognizes, is probably critical to being successful in today's society. So that is our next phase. But because all kids, as you well know, have to take English and social studies for 4 years, that gives us a way to take the work that the team has done, that's scaffolded at K-12, and we can continue to scaffold 9th grade lessons, 10th grade lessons. And we've even talked about, like, maybe in 9th grade lessons happen in English class, and in 10th grade they happen in social studies. But we know all kids take English and social studies, so we know we'll hit them all across the 4 years.
Was there discussion about making it, I mean, you mentioned it as an elective, but something that would be like a half year or 1 semester elective that would sit opposite health or something like that at one of the lower grades, so that then they could build on it as upperclassmen. But that way it'd be a little more, maybe more consistent. But I know now that you said it, I kind of like the idea of layering it in different subject areas in each year.
Yeah. If you look at the skills that were identified here, the skills are they're really directly aligned to all content areas. So we previously had a presentation on science and mathematics.
Yeah, the data science.
There was data science, and then just the nature of science itself.
Yeah.
Certainly, there is a ton of ELA standards embedded in the work. Social studies standards are really embedded in that work when it comes to sourcing and evaluating sources. So it really is, there really is alignment across the four academic areas that would make it very powerful if we could really incorporate that through the prism of science, or through the, through the lens of science, through the lens of social studies, and so on.
Are there any other questions?
I'm
sorry. Yep.
I just wanted to comment that when you were talking about co-teaching, what came to my mind was that probably about 20 years ago, we had that model at the high school, and it was in English, social studies. I believe it was called humanities, that one of my kids. So I think we've come like almost full circle with that model, but in a smaller scale. And I also wanted to say that I know that our supervisors have not been supervisors for a really, really long time at this point in time, but they have definitely stepped up to the challenge. Pam and Bob and Nick and everyone in the departments. And so the board is very appreciative of all the hard work that you put into it, and you're all doing a great job. And I'm really glad to see it, this model of supervision K-12. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave someone out.
Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you, Pam and Bob and Brian. And let me see who else. How about Debbie and Jessica, and of course, Kelly. And I hope everybody, did I get everybody? I hope, because you've all done a great job.
For coming as well. I'm
Pardon
sorry.
me?
I'm sorry, Ms. Aniston. I wanted to thank Chris and Caitlin, for coming as well.
Sorry. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was great.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It was great.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good
You
night,
know
everyone.
what? Could you, before you go, could I take a motion to leave our curriculum meeting and adjourn? How about Mr. Johnson? Sorry. And a second, Ms. Grinnell, and all in favor? All right. Thank you very much. And again, thanks again.
It was great to see everybody tonight.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Ellie, I haven't seen you in so long.
I know. Good to see you, Mary.
Yeah.
Take care.
Bye.